As of today, the Wednesday before the Australia 2026 F1 season opener, George Russell is the bookies' favourite for the F1 Drivers' World Championship, followed by Max Verstappen because it's Max Verstappen, and in third place, the Monegasque Charles Leclerc. Now, of course, you can never write off Max Verstappen, and the Red Bull powertrain behind him is pretty good, stronger perhaps than expected. But for a title fight this year, as incredible as the Dutchman is, I think it's a bit of a stretch. So putting him to one side, odds are in favour of Russell and Leclerc, which means odds on that we will be getting for the second season running a brand new F1 Drivers' World Champion. And I'll tell you what, it's about bloody time, because between these two, they've been waiting 13 years for this opportunity. My name's Tommo. Let's talk about it. 13 years, Tommo, what are you talking about? Clickbait, wow, let me explain, okay? Because George Russell made the step from Williams to Mercedes in 2022, marking 2026 as his 5th season at the team. And Charles Leclerc made the step from Sauber to Ferrari in 2019, making 2026 his 8th year at the Scuderia. 5 plus 8 is 13, quick maths. Job done. Both drivers kicked off their F1 careers at lower midfield teams. Both drivers made their step up to 2 of the top teams in the sport. Both drivers have been consistently let down by the cars underneath them, and both drivers will almost certainly fancy their chances this season. 2026 presents an opportunity they both deserve. So let's start talking Georgie boy. Back-to-back F3 and F2 champion, he had to get his shot in F1 pronto, and Williams obliged. The car from Grove may have been the worst on the grid in 2018, but surely they'd make step forwards in 2019, right? Wrong. Williams hit absolute rock bottom in 2019, missed the first 2 days of pre-season testing, lodged the least laps of anybody, were 2 seconds off the pace setters, and had parts on the car that weren't even legal. Alongside Robert Kubica that season, George Russell didn't really get any opportunities to show his ability, his talent, the Mr. Saturday that he would go on to become. In fact, the only opportunity for a point came all season in Hockenheim, in the chaos, and George couldn't get it done. It was Robert Kubica who instead took that singular point, the only point Williams scored all season. And for context, the next worst team has scored 28. George would remain at Williams for 3 full seasons alongside Nicholas Latifi in his second and third. The third year in particular is where he was really able to flex and show what he's capable of, you know. The team were able to give him way better hardware, and the icing on the cake, of course, was the technicality P2 he managed in Spa. Unreal qualifying in the wet, the race that kind of wasn't, yet he got that podium, combined with him filling in for Lewis Hamilton in 2020 as well. Mercedes had seen all they needed to plonk him in the seat instead of Valtteri Bottas for 22. However, Russell did make it clear at the time that he felt like he should have got that promotion significantly sooner. Speaking on the Beyond the Grid podcast in 2022, I think when we signed with Williams back in 2018, this was a team bearing in mind that had just spent 3 years scoring podiums, finishing P3, P3, P5 in the constructors, and then they had a very bad year in 2018 when they finished last. But we thought that this was a team at the time that can bounce back from this, and they'll be back in P5 to P3 region of competitiveness. So we all sort of agreed that 3 years was a good period, fighting for points, maybe for podiums. In hindsight, 3 years driving up my own at the back of the grid was too long, but unfortunately Claire did quite a good job at contract negotiations, and there was sort of no way out. George expected more from the team, that expectation was not fulfilled, and Claire, you know what, her allegiance is to Williams, not Mercedes, and she did what she had to do to protect her asset, which you cannot begrudge her for. Speaking to Beyond the Grid in 2025, George wanted to go to Mercedes in that last couple of years, and I couldn't let him go, and I hated that. It makes me upset to think about it. I needed him, I felt, more than Mercedes, and he was in contract. If I let him go, what message would that have sent? What would that have done to my team if I'd have let George go? Now, George may have wanted to go to Mercedes in 2020, even 2021. I can absolutely believe that, but would Toto have actually brought him in to replace the ever reliable prime number 2, never going to upset the apple cart, Valtteri Bottas? Like, I'm not so sure. It's very interesting to ponder how that, particularly that 2021 title fight, might have looked if George Russell is in a Mercedes. Is he taking points off Lewis? Is he locking horns with Max? Is he winning it all? It would have been iconic, I think, in many different ways, right? It wouldn't have matched the mathematical anomaly that was 2021, but it would have been fun. So yeah, either way, George Russell did not get that opportunity. He had to sit in a Williams and watch them win Constructors' titles in 19, 20 and 2021. But no matter, George, because you'll get a shot at the top seat in 22 and get your own chances to win World Drivers' Champion. No. Because unfortunately for him, his move to Mercedes perfectly aligned with their decline from the best to one of the rest. From 0 pods to porpoising, Mercedes got the ground effect regulations wrong from the very start and never really recovered. McLaren proved it could be done. Mercedes did not do it. And over those 4 seasons, the team never gave George, Lewis or Kimi a car capable of anything other than semi-consistent podiums and the odd win. I mean, that realisation in 22 must have been gutting for George, right? Especially as he got that little sniff. Again, Sakir, 2020, replaced Hamilton, took it to Bottas, should have won that race. A crazy unlucky fluke is all that stopped him. However, in that moment, he proved to Mercedes that he wasn't going to just be another number 2, another Bottas regen. He was a driver who could lead this team from the front. But without championship pedigree in the machinery, all he could do was, race the car he's put in, assert himself against Lewis Hamilton at his team, a team he'd asserted himself in for almost a decade. And that's exactly what he did, didn't he? A 4th, 8th and 6th in the F1 Driver Championship from 22 to 24 versus Lewis's 6th, 3rd and 7th. George didn't only hold his own over those 3 seasons as teammates. I think it's fair to say Russell outperformed Hamilton. And I'm sure in part that contributed towards Lewis's decision to take the gamble, take the punt on Ferrari. Which means for George, this is great with a highly rated, very raw rookie in Andrea Kimi Antonelli alongside him. There is no doubt, no question as to who the number 1 driver is at Mercedes, and that is George Russell, leading the line for this sleeping giant. And George was absolutely excellent last year in our end of season rankings, both yours and mine. We put in P2 to Max Verstappen. 2 wins, 3 P2s, 4 P3s, and most impressively of all, only outside the points once all season after that Mercedes disaster class in Monaco. If there were any lingering doubts, he's been a bit crashy in the past. His decision making hasn't always been the best. Those doubts, broadly speaking, should be put to one side after what we saw last year. And so here we are today after an excellent shakedown, an excellent pre-season test, and the expectation from most teams on the grid that Mercedes are still holding a little bit in reserve. It is no wonder that George Russell is the bookies' favourite to win this championship. It's been 5 years coming, 7 if you ask him, if he'd have got the promotion when he actually wanted it. But at long last, 2026 feels like the best opportunity yet for him to deliver on this potential. Big problem for him, there's a handsome bloke in red who's been waiting even longer. Back-to-back F3 and F2 champion, he had to get his shot in F1 pronto, didn't he? Sauber took the punt on Leclerc in 2018. And why does this part of the script sound familiar? Because they both did it. Back-to-back junior titles, in at a junior team, immediately impress. Now, it is of course true that Sauber in their Alfa Romeo guys were in a stronger place relative to where Williams were when George Russell started. They were running Ferrari engines at the time, the team that has now become Audi, of course, and it just made sense for the Scuderia to pop their young hotshot into the Sauber seat. He'd also tested at Haas years prior, but Sauber was his destination. And you know what? Charles Leclerc's first season in F1 at Himwil was pretty memorable. Caught up in that crazy Hulkenberg-Alonso shunt in Spa, a nasty crash out of the tunnel in Monaco, a sloppy shunt in Singapore. But don't get it twisted, just because Charles was caught up in some high-profile incidents, he more than made up for it with his speed. Charles closed out 2018 with back-to-back P7s in Mexico, Brazil, and Abu Dhabi, finishing the year with 39 points in total, a country mile ahead of his vastly more experienced teammate Marcus Ericsson, who managed just 9. However, I do remember at the time when Ferrari announced they would be replacing Kimi Räikkönen, their last F1 Drivers' World Champion, by the way, of course, from 2007, with this pretty raw Charles Leclerc, who'd had a lot of incidents but was very quick. There were some question marks, there was some doubt, there was some concern he wasn't ready to step into Kimi's shoes. But I think it's fair to say those doubts were pretty quickly eradicated, weren't they? Alongside a 4-time world champion teammate in Sebastian Vettel, Charles Leclerc would be hoping at the time to do exactly what, George Russell ended up doing to Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes and usurp the old-timer. And it only took him 2 races to make one hell of an impression. Charles Leclerc was absolutely robbed of his very first F1 race win in Bahrain. Pole to P1. Engine issue, 10 laps remaining, fell back to P3, gutted. However, the world saw that performance and saw already, wow, this kid is him. Charles will go on to win twice in his debut season, back-to-back in Spa and Monza. A bunch of podiums to boot would see him finish P4 in the driver's standings, 24 points ahead of Seb. An excellent first year and a head-to-head gap with his teammate that would only exacerbate in 2020. Now, of course, the lockdown year did see the Ferrari heavily nerfed after their engine trickery was caught by the FIA. The performance absolutely fell off a cliff. They plummeted to P6 in the constructors, did Ferrari, behind Racing Point and Alpine. Vettel was spinning off left, right and centre, and Leclerc only managed 2 podiums all season, kind of towards the start, and the team were kind of in absolute shambles. From giving Mercedes a pretty decent headache in 2019, all of a sudden Lewis has probably his most dominant season in F1 ever, and Ferrari are 6th. They're behind Renault. Of course, the saving grace for Charles is that he was still able to showcase his talent, his ability behind the wheel that season, and with Sebastian departing for pastures new, the Aston Martin project, of course, in 2021, Carlos Sainz would become his new teammate at Ferrari, a driver I'm sure Charles backed himself to do one over on. 21 saw a nice bounce back for the team, back to P3 in the constructors. Of course, a season that was massively dominated by the Mercedes, Red Bull, Hamilton, Verstappen narrative, but Charles still managed some decent results. I mean, for one, Leclerc almost snatched victory in Silverstone if it wasn't for Lewis's recovery drive after that incident. That P2 was his only podium all season, however 6 P4s, very good consistency. Although it is important to not forget that actually it is Carlos Sainz who outscored Charles Leclerc in 2021, only by 5.5 points in the end, but Carlos of course managed himself a P2 in Monaco and 3 P3 podiums that season, so slightly less consistent than Leclerc, but had slightly higher peaks. Vamos Carlos, very good. Thing is though, for Ferrari, everything was about the build up to the new regulations in 22, F1's most famous, most iconic marquee, who've been under delivering for years at this point. Now was the time surely to right the wrongs of the last decade and a half and bring success back to Maranello. Well, to start with, mission looked pretty complete, didn't it? Job looked almost done. Ferrari came flying out the gate. Charles Leclerc head to head with Max Verstappen. They were setting the benchmark early on in 22. Leclerc won 2 of the first 3 Grand Prix. And after round 5 in Miami, Charles Leclerc led the championship 104 points to Max Verstappen's 85. Things were good. Life was great. The world was healing until it wasn't. Pole position, round 6, Spain, until a DNF on lap 27 with a turbo failure. We can't afford for this to happen too many times, said Charles after the fact. Foreshadowing. Pole position, round 8, Baku, turned into a DNF through a power unit failure on lap 21. A double DNF and all, because Carlos Sainz's hydraulics failed earlier in that race to boot. Round 11, Austria was a return to form. Charles Leclerc did win that race in Max and Red Bull's backyard, but then came round 12, La Castellet, France. Need I mention that one? A season that started so promisingly saw Charles Leclerc finish a distant P2 to Max Verstappen, 146 points shy. And unfortunately for him, that P2 would be his best championship finish to date. I said this earlier regarding Mercedes, I say it again regarding Ferrari. McLaren proved it could be done. You could turn your car around within these ground effect regulations. They did not, the Papayans did. Ferrari did almost snatch the team's championship in 2024, went right down to the wire, only 14 points shy in the end, but close is not close enough. The ground effect era may not have been quite so disappointing for Ferrari as it was for Mercedes. I guess it depends how you measure it. There's certainly more recent expectation in Mercedes versus Ferrari, where we all get caught up in the vibes, but actually they haven't done anything of note for a long time now. But could this season be where that changes? Could Charles Leclerc's loyalty to Ferrari finally pay off? Because so far from what we've seen in Barcelona, in Bahrain pre-season testing, they're not quite maybe hitting like Mercedes are, but Ferrari are absolutely up there at the sharp end. And with Charles Leclerc's teammate Lewis Hamilton, an entity I would back Charles Leclerc to be over a 24 race season as well, things could be looking up here. It's been 8 years coming, but it feels like at long last 2026, at least on paper, is his best opportunity yet. I said the same thing for George Russell, basically bar for bar. Both incredible talents, chronically let down by their teams for too many years now, but maybe, just maybe at their respective primes, this is their best chance. So talk to me about it down in the comments below. Who would you back head to head? And fair play, right? Last year, when I said, I think Max and Charles are a cut above the rest, a lot of George Russell fans were not happy and were backing him. And fair play, I respect it. Genuinely, I would still pick Charles if I had to choose a #1 driver for my team between them two. But maybe I'm missing something. I just want to see them going at it. Pleasure as always. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.